Hey there, and welcome. Have you ever wondered how a simple observation a nurse makes on a ward can end up changing how patients are cared for all over the world? Well, it's not magic. It's a really structured process called nursing research. Today, we're going to unpack that whole journey, step by step, to see how those everyday questions become solid, evidence-based answers. Let's dive in.
So here's our game plan. We're going to walk through the 5 big phases of this journey. We'll start with that initial spark of an idea, move through all the planning and the actual doing, and finish up with how this research makes a real difference.
You know, every big discovery starts with a single moment, seeing a problem. This is the spark that gets the whole research engine going. It's all about noticing a gap in what we know and just being curious enough to ask, hey, could we be doing this better? So how does that actually happen? How does a nurse's gut feeling, that little hunch that something could be improved, get turned into hard, solid evidence that can change care everywhere? Well, the answer is all about following a structured, scientific process.
This definition right here really shows you how serious this process is. It's not just about looking around. When you see words like systematic, controlled, and critical, you know this is a super disciplined process. It means basing what you find on stuff you can actually see and measure, not just on tradition or a guess. And all that hard work isn't just for a grade or a publication. The ultimate goal is super practical. It's to build up a body of knowledge that leads directly to better nursing, better training for nurses, and, the most important thing of all, better outcomes for patients.
Okay, that brings us to phase 1, the concept. This is the big thinking and theorizing stage. It's where a really broad idea gets sharpened into a focused, researchable question.
This phase is all about laying the groundwork, and the order here is really important. You start by finding and narrowing down a problem. Then you dive into what's already been written to see what we already know. You don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? From there, you build a kind of guide. You form a specific guess or hypothesis to test, and you nail down exactly what you'll be studying.
I love this analogy. It just hits the nail on the head. You wouldn't start building a house without a blueprint, and you can't really do a study without a framework. It gives you the structure for the whole project and helps you make sense of what you find later on. Now, during this phase, it's super important to know the difference between these two things. A research question is the big guiding question you're trying to answer. A hypothesis, though, is a specific, testable prediction about what you think is going on. So one is the question, and the other is your proposed answer that you're going to test. All right, so the idea is solid. Now we move on to phase 2, designing the plan. If the last phase was about the what, this one is all about the how. It's where you create the detailed blueprint for the entire study.
This is where the researcher makes some really critical decisions. They pick the overall design, figure out who they're studying and how to get a representative sample, and choose the exact tools they'll use to collect data. And, this is huge, they set up all the rules for ethical protection and usually do a little pilot study, kind of like a dress rehearsal to work out any kinks.
The choice of design is key, and it really depends on your question. Are you just trying to describe what a situation looks like? That's a descriptive design. Looking for links between things? That's correlational. Or are you actually testing an intervention to see if it causes a change? That's when you get into quasi-experimental and experimental designs. Okay, let's pause here because this is absolutely fundamental. When you do research with people, you have a massive responsibility to protect them. Getting approval from an ethics board and making sure every single person gives their informed consent, well, those are completely non-negotiable. There are no shortcuts, period. Okay, the plan is locked and loaded. Now it's time for the investigation. We're lumping phases 3 and 4 together here because this is the doing and the sense-making part of the journey, where the blueprint comes to life and data starts turning into knowledge. This is where the plan kicks into high gear. The researcher goes out and carefully collects all the data. Then that raw info gets prepared. It's cleaned up, coded, and organized. Next up, the stats come out for analysis. And finally, the researcher has to figure out what it all means in the real world. This action stage has a formal name, the empirical phase. Empirical is just a fancy word that means it's based on observation and experience. This is where the plan meets reality, and the evidence, the data, is gathered in a really systematic way. This slide shows how you can turn chaos into order. Raw data can just look like a big mess of numbers, but once it's organized into tables like this one, suddenly patterns start to pop out. You can compare different groups, see relationships, and start to actually find the answers you're looking for. And this process of finding the meaning is the analytic phase. This is where statistical tools are used to test the hypothesis. It's the step that turns all those raw numbers into actual findings and lets the researcher draw some solid conclusions. Basically, analysis is what gives the data a voice.
And that brings us to our final phase, where all that hard work finally pays off. The research is done, the conclusions are made, but the journey is not over. Phase 5 is all about making sure this new knowledge has a real impact out in the world.
This last phase really boils down to two key things. First, you have to communicate what you found. You got to get the word out. And second, and this is the whole point, is to see those findings get used, to see them applied in the clinic. So how does this knowledge get shared? Well, mostly through official channels like detailed reports, articles in peer-reviewed journals where other experts check your work, and presentations at conferences. This is how the whole scientific community learns and builds on new discoveries.
And this visual just says it all. A research paper sitting on a shelf doesn't help anyone. The real victory is when the findings get woven into the daily work of nurses, into the curriculum at nursing schools, and into the policies of hospitals. That is how care actually gets better.
Now, it's really important to mention that the journey we followed today was for quantitative research, the kind that deals with numbers and stats, and it follows a pretty straight line. But there's another whole approach called qualitative research, which is often more of a loop and is all about understanding experiences by looking for themes in interviews and things like that. It's a different path, but it's just as valuable.
So, that brings us to the end of the researcher's journey, all the way from a simple question to a powerful conclusion that can improve people's lives. And it kind of leaves us with one final thought. Now that you see the process, what problem do you see in nursing practice? What question could be the spark for the next big discovery?